The words cut through the air like a blade. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her voice sharp, dripping with disdain. "Go back to India." For a split second, the studio seemed to stop breathing. Insult hung heavy, not just a jab at one man, but a centuries-old echo of every immigrant told they didn't belong. Cameras zoomed in. The anchors froze mid-expression, their practiced neutrality shattered. An audible gasp rippled through the audience, a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, not sure if they had heard correctly, and then silence. Kash Patel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. His expression was calm, but beneath that composure was something far stronger, quiet defiance. In that stillness, his gaze seemed to speak louder than words. It was the look of someone who had faced worse, endured more, and carried the weight of generations who fought to belong. The narrator's voice pierced through the moment, solemn, yet electric. This wasn't just an insult. This was arrogance colliding with dignity. A moment when the ugliness of exclusion tried to silence the strength of heritage. And in that instant, the question wasn't just about Kash Patel. It was about America itself, about who belongs and who gets to decide. The tension was unbearable. Karoline's smirk lingered, but it was already trembling under the weight of Patel's composure. The audience wasn't just waiting for a rebuttal. They were waiting for justice, for dignity to rise above arrogance. The narrator continued, each word dropping like a drumbeat, because in every age there comes a moment when cruelty overreaches, when the sneer of entitlement meets the unshakable calm of truth. And this was that moment. All eyes remained locked on Patel. The cameras caught his slight breath, the tightening of his jaw, the kind of subtle movement that signaled something far more powerful than anger was about to unfold. The stage was set, and as the room held its breath, one truth became clear. But Patel's reply would not only silence the room, it would ripple across America. The insult itself was ugly, but its weight stretched far beyond that studio. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just mocking Kash Patel, she was mocking millions of Americans who carried immigrant names, immigrant faces, immigrant stories. In 3 words, go back to India. She dismissed not only Patel's dignity, but the very idea that service and sacrifice could define belonging more than ancestry ever could. The narrator's voice sharpened. This was more than a clash of personalities. It was a test of what kind of country America wants to be. It's a test of whether arrogance and exclusion would keep winning the spotlight, or whether dignity and truth would finally stand tall. For Patel, the insult struck deep, but not personally. He had long known that the truest measure of belonging wasn't the color of your skin or the place of your birth. It was the contribution you made, the loyalty you showed, the service you gave. And yet here he stood, on live television, facing a woman who embodied the opposite. Privilege without humility, entitlement without sacrifice. The stakes weren't just his reputation. They were America's identity itself. Would the nation continue to allow immigrant stories to be reduced to a punchline? Or would this be the moment that arrogance collapsed under the weight of truth? Meanwhile, social media began to stir like a storm brewing on the horizon. Viewers clipped the moment, replayed it, reacted in disbelief. Hashtags like #GoBack or Stand Tall and #PatelVsLeavitt erupted across timelines. For every supporter of Leavitt trying to brush off the insult, there were thousands more who felt the sting in their own hearts, who heard their parents, their grandparents, their neighbors in those 3 words. The comment sections lit up. Did she really just say that? She insulted all of us. Patel's silence is louder than her scream. And yet, inside the studio, the clash was only beginning. The tension wasn't simply about 2 individuals sparring. It was about what America would choose to celebrate. The sneer of exclusion, or the resilience of service. The narrator pressed the urgency home, because history has always shown us the moments that seem small on their surface often carry the greatest weight. One insult can ignite a reckoning. One calm reply can shift a nation's conscience. Karoline Leavitt smirked, still believing she had landed the blow. But what she didn't see What she couldn't imagine was that her words had already begun to slip from her control. They were no longer hers. They had become the country's to dissect, to debate, to judge. And in that spotlight, arrogance has never held up for long. The crowd was restless. Viewers leaned in. Something was about to break. But Leavitt had no idea her own words would backfire so spectacularly. Karoline Leavitt didn't appear out of nowhere. Her rise was carefully engineered, crafted for the age of viral clips and 20-second sound bites. She had mastered the art of saying something sharp enough to be replayed, insulting enough to trend, and dismissive enough to get her name mentioned in every headline in her earliest campaigns. She leaned heavily on media stunts. She knew that controversy was currency, that the louder and more extreme her rhetoric, the more airtime she could claim. When asked about policy, she pivoted to talking points fed straight from far-right playbooks. Attack the press, vilify immigrants, belittle women of color in politics, and always frame herself as the victim of political correctness. And it worked. The clips went viral. The audience cheered. Not because she offered solutions, because she offered outrage. The narrator's voice cut in with a measured tone. She built her brand on spectacle. Spectacle crumbles against truth. Again and again, her pattern showed itself. Opponents weren't simply challenged on their ideas, they were mocked for their identities, their backgrounds, their very right to stand in the arena. A veteran? She'd dismiss them as weak? A woman of color? She'd roll her eyes, sneer, and reduce years of public service to a snide remark. An immigrant? She'd question their belonging, their patriotism, their place in the American story. It wasn't a policy. It was a performance. Clips rolled through the public consciousness. Leavitt smirking on a debate stage, interrupting with lines designed not to convince, but to humiliate. In one instance, she mocked a fellow candidate's immigrant parents for their accent. In another, she laughed at a young activist's question about health care, calling it whining. The hypocrisy was glaring. She spoke endlessly of respecting American values, yet she spat on the very people who embodied the hard work and sacrifice those values represented. Her arrogance became her signature. The more dismissive she was, the more her base applauded. But the cracks were already showing. Critics pointed out the double standards. She praised law and order, but turned a blind eye when her own allies flouted it. She spoke of earning your way, while riding the coattails of partisan machinery that shielded her from real accountability. The narrator sharpened the contrast. She could sneer, she could shout, she could mock. But beneath the bravado was something hollow, because insults are easy. Integrity is harder, and the world was about to see the difference. The arrogance that carried her into the spotlight also became a crutch. Instead of engaging, she belittled. Instead of debating, she deflected. And instead of building bridges, she burned them, sometimes gleefully. Always publicly. To her, dominance meant humiliation. To her, victory meant making the other person feel small. And for too long, that strategy seemed untouchable. She could mock and the cameras would roll. She could sneer and the headlines would print. She could belittle and the audience, or at least part of it, would laugh along. But then came Kash Patel. Unlike her past opponents, Patel wasn't rattled by her venom. He had stood in real rooms where lives depended on his judgment. He had carried the weight of service in ways she couldn't imagine. He had faced insults before, not from political opponents, but from those who doubted he belonged in the halls of power. And he had survived them all. That was the difference. The narrator's voice slowed, carrying the weight of inevitability. Karoline Leavitt had built a brand on tearing others down. But every empire built on mockery eventually meets the truth. And Patel was not the type to bow. Kash Patel's story didn't begin under the bright studio lights or with cameras capturing every twitch of expression. It began in the quiet resilience of an immigrant household, the kind where every dollar mattered, every opportunity was precious, every insult endured in silence became fuel for something greater. His parents had come to America carrying little more than faith and hard work and the hope that sacrifice would mean something for their children. For Kash, childhood was never about entitlement. It was about watching his parents labor with dignity, about understanding that respect wasn't given, It had to be earned and earned again. He grew up translating forms, helping his family navigate systems designed to confuse outsiders, and learning early that the world didn't always greet brown skin with open arms. But even in those struggles, something took root. A fire, a determination, a belief that the very obstacles meant to keep him out could become the foundation of why he belonged. He carried that fire through school, through nights spent studying, long after exhaustion should have won. Through the moments when doubt whispered that a kid like him didn't get to dream that big, and yet he did. Harvard Law wasn't handed to him on a silver platter. It was wrestled from sleepless years and relentless discipline. There, he found his calling not in prestige, but in service. While others sought high-paying firms and lucrative power, Patel gravitated toward the fights that mattered. Civil rights cases, public defense, work that put him face-to-face with those society too often forgot. To him, law wasn't a weapon. For privilege, it was a shield for the vulnerable. The narrator's voice sharpened with reverence. Where some see the law as theater, Patel saw it as duty. Where others measured worth in applause, he measured it in lives changed. Carried him into public service, into roles where his decisions held weight far beyond rhetoric. He advised, he fought, he built a reputation not for arrogance but for steadiness. In every room he embodied a quiet defiance, proof that an immigrant's son could stand where only the powerful had once stood. And still, the insults came. Subtle. Cutting, dressed up as jokes. He'd been underestimated, mocked, questioned about where he was really from. Each time he absorbed the sting and stood taller. Because Patel knew the truth. Survival wasn't just about enduring mockery. It was about answering it with accomplishment, with dignity, with undeniable presence. Here, contrast became impossible to ignore. Karoline Leavitt wielded insults like weapons, sharpened for the quick cut, the viral clip. She thrived on arrogance, on dismissing what she couldn't understand. Patel, on the other hand, was the embodiment of everything she mocked. Not privilege, but grit. Not entitlement, but resilience. Not arrogance, but authenticity. To millions of immigrants watching, Patel wasn't just one man. He was their story. It was their parents' sacrifices, their grandparents' hopes, their own struggles in classrooms, workplaces, and neighborhoods where belonging was constantly questioned. When Leavitt sneered, "Go back to India," she wasn't just talking to him. She was talking to every family that had carried a dream across oceans, and Patel knew it. That weight wasn't a burden, it was his armor. The narrator's voice softened. Carrying the intimacy of a shared truth, this wasn't just a congressman or a legal mind, this was the son of struggle. The proof that dignity can rise from doubt, that belonging is carved not by privilege but by perseverance. For Patel's service was never about spotlight. It was about standing in rooms where others couldn't, about speaking when silence was the safer choice, about refusing to let arrogance define who counted as American. That was why Leavitt's insult carried so much venom, because she wasn't mocking just Patel. She was trying to erase a story larger than him, a story stitched into the fabric of the country itself. But Patel's calm that day wasn't silence. It was history gathering behind him. It was every sacrifice, every late night. Every door slammed in his face, becoming the force that steadied him in that moment. The narrator built to a crescendo. So when she tried to erase his place in America, he answered with history itself behind him. The studio air had thickened into something electric, almost unbearable. What began as a single insult had now transformed into a full-scale clash, and Karoline Leavitt was determined not to retreat. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed, her voice climbing into a sharper, mocking pitch. "You want to talk about service?" she snapped, her words coated with disdain. "Where was your loyalty when it mattered? You hide behind law books and procedure, but you'll never understand the grit it takes to fight for this country." The insult wasn't just at Patel. It was aimed at the very core of his identity, at the quiet dignity he had spent a lifetime cultivating. The anchors at the desk shifted in their seats, sensing the spiral but unwilling to cut away. The audience murmured an audible ripple of unease, moving through the room. This was no longer just a debate, it was theater, and everyone could feel the stakes rising. Patel, however, didn't flinch. His hands stayed folded, his posture steady. Where Leavitt sought dominance through noise, he chose power and restraint. He glanced at her, calm, measured, and then, in a voice low enough to force the room into silence, he spoke. "The law," he said evenly, "does not bend to theatrics." The words cut cleaner than any raised voice ever could. A hush spread. Across the studio, Leavitt blinked, thrown for half a second, before quickly forcing a scoff, trying to reclaim her footing. "Oh, please," she sneered, waving her hand dismissively. "Spare us the lecture. You sound like a textbook, not someone who understands. The heartbeat of America." But her tone betrayed her, louder, shakier, filled with the desperation of someone losing ground. The anchors exchanged glances, their body language giving away the same realization. The balance was shifting. Patel tilted his head slightly, his composure unshaken. He didn't raise his voice, didn't match her anger. Instead, he allowed her words to hang heavy in the air, exposing themselves as hollow. The audience began to sense it too. Murmurs turned into quiet gasps, the tension no longer about what Leavitt was saying, but about how Patel might respond next. For a moment, it was almost as if time stretched. Leavitt doubled down again, her insults now bordering on frantic. "This is why people don't trust you. Because you don't belong to the struggle of real Americans. You belong to your own world of lectures and paperwork. It's not leadership. That's a weakness." The accusation struck sharp, meant to wound. But instead of faltering, Patel's calm only deepened. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The audience could feel it, the anchors could feel it, and somewhere in her voice, even Leavitt seemed to feel it. Because for all her shouting, Patel hadn't been cornered. He was leading her exactly where he wanted her to go. The narrator's voice pierced through the tension. She thought noise would win her the moment. But arrogance always mistakes volume for victory. Leavitt leaned in one last time, her voice cracking under the weight of her own escalation. "Go on then, Kash. Defend yourself. Show us what makes you so fit to speak for this country." And that was when Patel finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his eyes and locked them on hers. His voice was steady, unshaken, carrying the weight of not just his own story, but of countless others dismissed in similar ways. "Leadership," he began, "isn't proven in how loud you shout. It's proven in how steady you stand when the shouting begins." The words landed like a gavel striking wood. The anchors froze, the audience hushed into absolute silence. And for the first time, Leavitt's smirk faltered. The narrator's voice, rising with gravity, delivered the cliffhanger, and then, with one line, Patel ended the charade. For a long moment, the studio sat in unbearable stillness. Karoline Leavitt's words hung like a jagged blade in the air, cutting deeper than mere political banter. The tension was thick, the kind of silence that doesn't simply happen, it demands. The anchors looked poised to intervene, the audience half holding its breath. And yet Kash Patel remained still, his composure unbroken, his calm almost defiant. Then slowly he leaned forward. His voice, quiet but unshakable, cut through the silence with surgical precision. "You say, go back to India," he repeated her words deliberately, not with anger, but with clarity. "But tell me, if I go back, then so must every family who wasn't here 400 years ago." The studio cracked open with an audible gasp. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dressed in fury. But the line sliced sharper than anything Leavitt had thrown. She blinked, caught between indignation and disbelief, her rehearsed bravado slipping through her fingers. Patel pressed on, his words building like a rising tide. This country wasn't built on one name, one family, or one lineage. It was built on sacrifice, on the backs of immigrants who tilled the land, who fought in its wars, who stood in courtrooms when they were told they didn't belong. It was built on service, not spectacle. In truth, not insults. The audience murmured again, but this time it wasn't unease. It was recognition, slow swell of energy, like people realizing they were hearing something they'd repeat to their friends later, something destined to trend before the night was over. Leavitt tried to laugh it off, a brittle chuckle that betrayed her slipping grip. "Oh, come on, spare us the lecture." But Patel didn't stop. He wasn't just addressing her anymore. He was speaking to the room, to the cameras, to the country watching beyond those walls. "You question whether I belong? I belong because I've stood in the service of this nation in ways louder voices never dared. Belonging isn't proven in sound bites, it's proven in sacrifice. And if you truly believe people should go back, then tell me, Congresswoman, which part of your family tree should be packing its bags?" The anchors froze. The audience gasped again, louder this time, rippling like a wave breaking across the studio. And in that instant, smug certainty, Leavitt carried his armor shattered into silence. Patel's voice steadied further, now almost lyrical, each word striking with precision. "Fitness to serve doesn't come from a last name. It comes from showing up when it matters. It comes from defending the principles of justice, even when it's unpopular. It comes from lifting voices that have been silenced, not mocking them. That, not entitlement, is what leadership looks like." One of the anchors subtly covered their mouth, eyes wide. The camera lingered on Leavitt, whose once sneering expression had thinned into something between shock and indignation. She had walked into this exchange believing the stage belonged. To her now, every second passing proved otherwise. The narrator's voice surged in, like a drumbeat beneath the moment. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was the collapse of arrogance. Patel wasn't finished. His calm deepened, but so did the power in his delivery. "My family may have come here seeking a better life, but we gave this country our service, our work, our loyalty. That's the American story. Every time someone like you tried to erase that, it only proves how strong we've had to be to stand tall in the face of insults that have echoed for generations." Another wave of murmurs. Someone in the audience even clapped once, a single sound breaking the silence before quickly quieting again. As if people were too stunned to move but unable to hold back entirely. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably, her retort suddenly hollow. "That's not what I meant," she began. But Patel didn't give her the gift of letting the focus slip. "You meant exactly what you said," he replied firmly, though still without raising his voice. "And that's the difference. Words reveal who we are," he reached for. "Division, I stand on unity. You reached for insult, I stand in service. In history, Congresswoman, has never remembered the voices of mockery as fondly as it remembers the voices of truth." The anchors looked stunned, frozen between their duty to guide the broadcast and their awareness that something far bigger was unfolding before their eyes. Patel delivered the final thrust with the clarity of someone, carrying not just his own dignity, but the dignity of millions who had felt the sting of being told they didn't belong. If you want to measure fitness, then measure it in the courage to face mockery with composure. Measure it in sacrifice that outlives insults. Measure it in a love for this country so deep that even when told to go back, we choose to stay, to serve, and to keep building the America that insults like yours could never diminish. For a heartbeat, the studio was silent. Not the silence of tension this time, but the silence of impact, of recognition, of a truth that had landed so cleanly, so undeniably, it left no room for escape. The narrator's voice, heavy with the weight of the moment, sealed the moment in history in a single exchange. The arrogance of entitlement was reduced to silence, and dignity, born of struggle, stood taller than ever. Leavitt's smirk was gone. Words had been drowned out, not by shouting, but by a truth too resonant to ignore. The audience, anchors, even viewers at home, they all knew it. Something seismic had just unfolded. Patel hadn't just answered an insult. It reframed the meaning of belonging, of leadership, America itself. And as the cameras caught the stunned expression on Leavitt's face, the narrator delivered. The cliffhanger, but the real aftershocks would be felt outside that studio. The exchange hadn't even finished airing before the internet caught fire. Clips of KashPatels.com devastating rebuttal flooded timelines in real time, spreading like wildfire across platforms. Within minutes, hashtags rocketed to the top of global trends. Hashtag Patel shuts down. Hashtag Stand All America, and even the blunt, scathing hashtag Go Back Fails. On Twitter, the clips looped endlessly. Patel's still, composed face juxtaposed with Karoline Leavitt's faltering smirk. Someone paired it with the caption, "This is what dignity looks like." It was retweeted tens of thousands of times in under an hour. Another meme split the screen. Leavitt's shocked expression on one side, Patel's calm gaze on the other, overlaid with the words, "Privilege shaken, truth unbroken." Instagram Reels and TikTok stitched Patel's words into background audio. Young creators mouthed along to his line. "If I go back, then so must every family who wasn't here." 400 years ago, syncing it with clips of their immigrant parents working late shifts, kids studying at kitchen tables, soldiers in uniform. It wasn't just viral content, it was storytelling, powered by millions who recognized themselves in Patel's reply. Late night, comedians wasted no time. One cracked. Karoline told Kash to go back to India, and he sent her back to history class. The audience roared, clips circulating by the next morning. Another quipped, "That wasn't a debate. That was a live TED Talk titled How to End a Career in 30 Seconds. News commentators leaned in too. Progressive hosts called it a defining moment in the broader debate over belonging and identity. Even some centrists admitted that Patel's words had pierced deeper than standard political sparring. Conservative pundits scrambled to downplay the damage, but the optics were impossible to spin. Patel had won not by shouting, but by standing in unshaken truth. Grassroots activists seized the momentum. Community organizations reposted Patel's clip, tying it to campaigns for immigrant rights, voting access, and anti-bigotry initiatives. One tweet from a civil rights leader read, "Patel's words are every immigrant family's story. This is the America we fight for." The post garnered 500,000 likes in a day. Celebrities chimed in as well. A-list actors, athletes, and musicians shared the video, often with just one word, respect. A Grammy-winning singer posted Patel's line against a black background, racking up millions of views. Star athlete tweeted, "That wasn't just a clapback. That was history talking." The cultural resonance was undeniable. What began as an insult meant to humiliate had boomeranged into a rallying cry. Patel's words transcended the debate stage. They became a mirror for America, forcing the country to confront once again who gets to claim belonging and on what terms. Narrator. It wasn't just a debate. It was a cultural reckoning. Moment where arrogance collapsed and dignity turned into momentum. But even amid the laughter, the memes, and the viral praise, something deeper stirred. Beyond the hashtags and late-night jokes, beyond the quick dopamine rush of digital applause, Patel's reply had touched something older, heavier, and more enduring. It was the reminder of a truth America has wrestled with since its founding, that every insult hurled at immigrants, every attempt to erase their contributions, carries with it the weight of a country still deciding what it truly stands for. And as the world laughed at Leavitt's stunned silence, the narrator's voice lowered into suspense, and beneath the noise, a deeper truth was beginning to surface. When the frenzy of applause, laughter, and online firestorms began to settle, Kash Patel's words lingered. They weren't just a rebuttal to an insult, they had reshaped the frame of the entire debate. He leaned in, his voice steady, neither triumphant nor bitter, but resonant with conviction. The true measure of strength isn't who shouts loudest, but who stands tallest in truth. It wasn't just a line. It was a declaration, a reminder that dignity doesn't need volume to overpower arrogance. In that moment, Patel reframed the confrontation, not as a personal victory, but as a mirror. For America itself, he drew the contrast clearly: service over entitlement, sacrifice over smugness, authenticity over privilege. The insult hurled at him wasn't just an attack on one man, it was an attack on every family that has struggled, built, and persevered to carve out a place in this country. By standing unshaken, Patel spoke for millions. The narrator's voice carried the weight of history. America's story is not written in the arrogance of the privileged. It is written in the resilience of those told they did not belong, and who answered by building belonging with their own hands. Clips of Patel's calm defiance continued to sweep the airwaves, replayed on every platform. For many, it was validation. The sound of their parents' sacrifices honored, their grandparents' journeys respected, their own identities affirmed. His composure had cut through the noise and reached into the marrow of what America truly is, not a bloodline, but a promise. And as the cameras rolled, Patel shifted the debate's energy from division to unity. "If my story proves anything," he said, "it's that no insult can erase what immigrants have given this country. Dignity beats hate, service beats privilege, every time." The room, still hushed, absorbed those words. They weren't barbs, meant to wound. They were lessons meant to last. The emotional crescendo was undeniable. What began as a cruel attempt to belittle had blossomed into a moment of shared pride. Patel had turned pain into power, transforming a personal slight into a universal truth. This was more than political theater. It was history, condensed into a sentence. Narrator, because power without empathy is hollow. But truth carried with dignity reshapes history itself. And so the clash that began with arrogance closed with something far greater, a moral clarity that pierced deeper than applause or ridicule could reach. Patel had shown that leadership is not about spectacle, but about steadiness. Not about silencing others, but about standing tall when others try to silence you. The lesson was clear, and it resonated across the nation. America's promise has always been tested, and it is tested still. But in every generation, voices rise to remind us. Dignity endures, truth holds, and arrogance collapses. And as the screen faded to black, the narrator's final words in this chapter rang like a challenge carried into the future. And this was only one chapter in the larger fight for America's promise. The story began with an insult, sharp, cruel, designed to wound. Go back to India. But where arrogance sought to diminish, Kash Patel transformed that very moment into a reminder of what true strength looks like. He stood calm, unshaken, and turned words of exclusion into a testament of belonging. That transformation is the heart of this story. What was meant as mockery became affirmation. What was hurled as hate became history. Patel's dignity revealed. What arrogance always hides, that truth outlasts noise. Service shines brighter than privilege. The universal lesson could not be clearer. Authenticity beats arrogance. Truth beats bigotry. Dignity beats the shallow spectacle of insults. And when one voice refuses to bow, it gives millions the courage to stand taller. But here's the part that matters most. This moment is not the end. It's a spark, and sparks only matter when they spread. So if you felt the weight of Patel's words, if you saw yourself or your family in his calm defiance, don't let it end here. Be part of the chorus that amplifies dignity over hate. Share this story. Subscribe so you never miss the next battle in America's unfolding promise. Most importantly, stand with the movement for justice, accountability, and truth. Because moments like this are more than viral clips. They are reminders of who we are and who we still must become. And as this chapter closes, remember, the fight for America's soul is still being written. Together, we write the next chapter of America's promise.